Kairate friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly rabbit hole for all wacky ancient facts. My name is Mark Graves, and today I'm going to be discussing some strange ideas that the ancient world had about geography and about the humans that lived far away from them on the edges of their world. So there are many theories of how geography worked in ancient Greece. Sort of the earliest one that we have recorded is Homer's pretty simple idea that the Earth is a sphere and that the ocean actually goes as a river around it. And you see this in poetry for a very long time. Even after Homer, poets often refer to the ocean as a river. So that's sort of a neat tidbit. Then later, of course, Pythagoras said, well, I think the Earth is a sphere. And then later, a fellow named Crates of Malos, added to this that yes, the Earth is a sphere, and there are four sort of symmetrical land masses placed on this sphere. So if Greece is up here, there's one that's opposite of us, and then two that are opposite of each other this way. And they had fun names for the people who lived on these opposite land masses. The ones that lived with their heads upside down, they called the antipodes. So that's kind of a fun name. Then there was also a slight modification of this theory. One of the Ptolemies said that the Earth, it's still a sphere, but it's covered in land, and that the ocean is actually broken up into four lakes that are all symmetrical and opposite of one another. So those are sort of the main theories of geography. Then next to this, all that stuff, is the theory that to the west are all of the utopias, all the myths about Fountain of Youth, Atlantis, all of that is usually placed to the west. So there's that idea that somewhere off on the west border of everything are the Hesperides, who are the sort of nymph-like creatures who guard the golden apples. That's all to the west. And then, even though the idea of the sphere kind of became a major theory, the idea where the attitude, I guess, that Greece was the center of the world persisted. So in that original just flat earth theory, Greece was supposedly at the center. Specifically Delphi, which was an important temple to Apollo, was usually called the navel or the belly button of the world, which is adorable. So the Greeks thought they were the middle, and then in all of their stories, the further you got from that navel, the less godlike, the less human even people were, and the more barbaric. So that's where a lot of their stories are coming from. So, like I said, the further from Greece you go, the more sexually different you might behave. So, an obvious example is the Amazons, who did not engage in marriage, which was the very important common custom in Greece. So they didn't get married, and they would just come out once or twice a year to have sex, and that was it. And there is also stories of when Alexander went east, he encountered these women who killed the men that they had sex with. Now, I'm not totally clear whether the sex was just so intense that they killed the men outright, or whether they were sort of nymph-like and they had sex with men on a beach and then they would sort of drown them as they were having sex with them. Either way, quite sexually odd and very violent and dangerous. If you were a Greek, you'd be quite intimidated by all this. Then there is also the story of a tribe called the Nasamones, and their tradition was on the night of a wedding, the bride would have sex with all the men in the tribe. So again, just very strange from an ancient Greek's perspective. So in addition to this sexual strangeness, the Greeks also thought that the people on the fringes of society engaged in, or were more likely to engage in cannibalism. Most obvious example of this is when Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus. One of the first things he does is he grabs some of Odysseus' crew, stuffs them in his mouth. Great example of a cannibal. There's also stories of a tribe called the Nueroi, and most or all of the people in this tribe were werewolves, and so they sometimes would eat people, but these are all people who lived sort of on the fringes and were great examples of people who were far from the center of the earth. Then there's also examples of people who just physically look less human or look different, who live on the fringes of Greek geography. There's a whole bunch of these. One of the first is the hippopodes. That literally means horse-footed. You can hear hippo in there, where we get hippopotamus from. So they had the feet of horses. There are the phanesii, and they apparently go completely naked, which is odd for the Greeks. Well, they went naked a lot too, but only in some contexts. And then all they wore was actually, they had these giant ears, the phanesii, and they would wrap them around their body. So that's a bit strange. There are the pygmies, and then there's a bunch of variations of humans who they either don't have their upper lip, so like their nose and their mouth are more connected, or maybe they don't have a nose or they don't have a mouth, they just have one hole in their face. Some of them have to eat through straws. There's just something odd going on there. There are also the dog-headed people, so they're literally sort of half human, half animal. They're called the Kinemolgi. There are the four-footed Arbatatitai. Artabatitai. I think I said that correctly. And then finally, there are the Akephaloi, which literally means the unheaded people. So these people were thought to not have heads, but they did have a face. It was just on their chest, so they'd have like their eyeballs here and their mouth. The pictures of these are quite strange. Now, it's possible the Greeks just came up with this. It was just a strange otherworldly tale. People have also thought that this might have originated in something real. So a couple theories are that there was a tribe who, when they hunted or they went to war, they kind of scrunched their head down because they were trying to hide, or perhaps their armor sort of made their head and their shoulders seem a bit more blended, and maybe to try to unnerve an enemy. People have also postulated, I guess, that maybe some Greeks saw some monkeys who had their head kind of tucked down there. So maybe that's where they got this idea from. Either way, the pictures are quite creepy. So that's a whole bunch of examples of the Greeks sort of dehumanizing people who lived far away from them. So just as strange, if not more so than everything I've discussed so far, is that these myths did not go away. They persisted through the medieval and then the early modern period. Because people were still studying Latin, still studying these myths. Columbus, for instance, thought that there was a prophecy about him in an ancient Roman play. So there's this play where Medea, who's a witch, very famous and powerful witch, and she's accompanying Jason, who sort of captains or leads what's sometimes called the very first ship in Greece, and he goes on all these grand adventures and she helps him. And at one point she's sort of discussing this innate unease that the Greeks had around ships. Even though they used them constantly, they were great sailors, they had a feeling towards ships sort of like we do towards a lot of modern technology, like spaceships and computers. We feel a little icky, we feel a little hubristic, we feel like it's gonna bite us in the butt somehow. And so she's discussing this fear that the Greeks had about ships. But then she's also addressing how amazing it is and how they've been able to go on all these adventures and discoveries. And at one point she says, there will come an epoch late in time when ocean will loosen the bonds of the world, and the earth lie open in its vastness, when Tethys will disclose new worlds, and Thule not be the furthest of lands. So Columbus thought that this was referring to him, and was one of the many things that motivated him to make this voyage. Then when he gets to the New World, and the people who come after him, the discoverers and the explorers, they don't objectively describe what they see there. And they also don't come up with new myths. They don't really come up with Bigfoot or anything. Most of what they report is stuff from Greek mythology. So it's almost like they don't even see this land that they've discovered, that they just see what they come equipped with, what they think foreign lands are like. So it's very strange and fascinating. For example, we get stories of Amazons. I mean, that's why the Amazon River is named what it is. We get stories of women who killed men through sex, just like we got with Alexander. We get stories of Cyclops, even of cannibals, and there's a theory that that's actually where the name Caribbean comes from cannibal. And then finally, we get these stories of men without heads, who just had the faces down here. So maybe they were seeing monkeys or something, or maybe they really were just projecting that much onto this new world, sort of their hopes and dreams and fantasies. And it's just really strange and really interesting. So thank you so much for checking this video out about ancient geography and myths of foreign peoples. This was Classics in Color with Mark Graves. I hope to see you next week. Karating.